Okay, you can't have a meeting like this without talking some nutrition, so our next talk is keeping up with diet formulations with rapidly changing ingredient prices. I'll be darned. Let's go with Mike.
All right. For about the next hour, we're going to talk about some of the results that are in the publication that you picked up on the table. And before I get into that, just like Jim had done, I want to make sure we thank the people that actually do the work. The graduate students, we have a whole group of them sitting together over here that have done all the work. This is an old picture from last year's Swine Day. It's the only time we get them dressed up enough to take a picture, I think. but it's, oh, this is a new one. You guys put it in there even. Wow. They updated my slide for me when I didn't even know it. This is one from this morning. Oh, wow. Yeah, I didn't even know you did that. Thank you. So really proud of this group. And we've got a tremendous group of graduate students. We've been very fortunate over the years to work with some very high quality people. And I was telling Steve Weiss this morning, I said that sometimes you hit the gloom and doom about what's going on with the next generation and stuff. And I think we're very fortunate with where we work and where we live that we don't see a lot of that. We see a very bright future with the quality of students that come through the program and we're able to work with not only the graduate student side but the undergraduates that we've been having the opportunity to work with on a lot of these research programs. Has been very, very good. And the work that they've done just in the report this year, there's 32 papers, 41 different experiments, and almost 29,000 pigs involved with the research trials. And so we obviously have to thank all of our research partners that also allow us to get this work done. In terms of where you find some of this data, people say, well, this is our summary. Where can we read the gory details of each of the projects? It's up on our website. And this last year, we get a lot of the questions about where to find our latest specifications and stuff. KSUSwine.org will drop you right into this page. We've got our nursery diet updates. We made all those updates, and every time we do an update on those, we post them up here first. The premix updates, you always want to make sure that you're using the latest recommendations on the premix side, particularly with the phytase sources changing as rapidly as they are. We try to keep those updated up here. All of our journal papers, if you want to look at scientifically what's getting published, they're all located and linked here. The abstracts from the animal science meetings. We've been trying to, all of our presentations from our animal science meetings are now being put up here as podcasts. The graduate students are doing an excellent job of taping those and getting those posted. And then the Swine Day publications are also down here. This year's PDF with all of it's about 350 pages, something like that, Bob, with get all of the details from the report. And then the presentations, next week, with Tim Carson's help, we'll have the presentations posted under the Swine Day presentation tab. Okay. Undergraduate research has also become a very important part of our program at K-State, and with our administration has really been pushing and emphasizing the importance of involving undergraduates in the research program. We've been very fortunate. These are just the undergraduates that have done research projects in the last year with us, and want to give Hyatt Frobos and John DeYoung a tremendous amount of credit for the work that they've done with each of these students to give them a research opportunity. And also it's an opportunity to identify very good talent that may not have had much experience with pigs and give them some of that exposure. And now we're getting some of them to go to graduate school even. And so it's very, very nice to see. In terms of some of the accomplishments on the undergraduate side, Kia Gorley won the undergraduate competition paper with some of Hyatt's help and advice with getting her ready for that presentation at Midwest Animal Science. And then Kia, Jake, and Jared all won a National Pork Board scholarships. So some very high quality pork students that we have in our program. On the graduate student side, Chad was a Midwest Young Scholar. Hyatt was first in the oral competition at Midwest Animal Science meetings, and Kyle was second in the oral competition. So we do have a little bit of competition amongst themselves even at times. And then Kyle and Marcio also were winners of the Pinnacle Award from International Ingredients, and so I want to recognize them for their accomplishments. In terms of moving into what we're doing on the research side, certainly when we talk about our program in terms of the applied nutrition side, we always are focusing on feed cost. And feed cost is, of course, went through some big ups and downs over the last 15 years, shown in this graph. And there was a time when we could look at feed costs being always under 20 cents per pound a gain. And you can see where it peaked out here. Some of our producers a little over 45 cents. This example, just over 42 cents per pound a gain on closeout groups. You see that start moving down in 2013, beginning of 2014. And what we're seeing now with pigs that are placed today, we're looking at feed costs that are running in that 20 to 21 cents per pound a gain is where we look at current closeouts at. So we get a lot of questions in that area. Certainly, like I think what Dennis showed, is we do expect some of these prices may be moving up a little bit over the year as we have more and more pigs being put on feed. But even with that, we still want to focus on that feed cost is going down. That is still, of course, our largest cost in the cost of production. It's still sitting at 60-65% of our cost of production. And we look at this is another way to look at what Dennis was showing this morning about the profitability of our industry. Anything that's between this cost of production line, of course, and the price line is profit. And the largest area of profitability we've had in a very, very long time in the swine industry. We want to take advantage of that, harvest as much of that as possible, but also I think we're all concerned about end of 2015, 2016, and where we may be headed in terms of some of these prices. Before I jump into some of the feed cost stuff, Bob wanted me to throw in the market weight discussion because he's getting a lot of questions about market weight. And I have got some questions about, well, now that prices have come moderated just a little bit, shouldn't we be bringing market weights back down? Well, the reality is for most of our producers in Kansas, a big bulk of our producers would market to Triumph Foods. And Triumph this last year changed the contract from being a more traditional type contract to being more of a barn dump contract for anybody that's on the open market with Triumph. That contract is very favorable to moving your market weights as prices and profitability changes. But right now, when you look at where we were sitting at $300 feed cost and $90 carcass base, we were sitting there thinking we were pretty heavy pigs at 280, 290 pounds. You look at today's situation with relatively decent carcass prices, obviously, and much, much lower feed cost, you can't make pigs heavy enough. You physically don't have the time or the space to make them as heavy as they will incentivize you to do it today. Not every packing grid looks like this, and we do have our calculators up on the web for you to look at. But when you start looking at the opportunity to harvest profit, if you're selling pigs at Triumph at 280 pounds right now, which sometimes they'll tell you that's what they want, there's potentially $8-10 sitting on the table today. So I know we don't want all that pork in the market, but on an individual producer basis, their incentives are to take them very, very heavy today. Okay, the things we're going to talk about the remainder of this hour is DDGs, amino acids, fat, and we'll let Bob and Joel walk through most of these. I'm going to just talk about where we're sitting at with DDGs right now. I was thinking about it while I was sitting here this morning, actually, and how to, going back into some of these calculators we have on the website to figure out what the economic situation looks like at any given time. There's over 20 experiments that went into building this calculator. And so there's a lot of work that the graduate students put in to be able to allow us to put together a simple little tool like this that we can plug numbers into. But you look in the current situation, these amino acid prices obviously have come up considerably to where they were last summer as compared to, obviously, we've dropped the price of corn and soybean meal some. And you can plug in your own numbers, but no question right now, if you let the calculator do the work for you, it tells you as high a level as we allow to pull in this calculator to 40% DDGs is what you should feed all the way to market. Okay? That's what the economics are telling us on DDGs, and we're sitting at a little over $8 a pig today on whether you use DDGs at 40% or not use it at all. If you plug in 30%, say I don't want to go quite that high, and feed it up to towards the end and then drop it back a little and pull it out at the end, there's a little over $5 a pig sitting there, and you're looking at about a $3 potential difference between the 40% and this withdrawal program. And we'll talk a little bit more about this withdrawal strategy. And I circled up here the tryptophan. This is allowing tryptophan to come in the diet. This difference in economics of DDGs this last year has toggled a lot off of tryptophan and whether you use tryptophan or not. Now, with tryptophan price going up, I toggle in here taking the tryptophan out and say, well, if we don't have tryptophan available or it's too expensive, it does drop the value a little bit, but nowhere near what it did even a month ago. Because tryptophan obviously has went up in price. And so it's made that offsetting not quite as big as it was. But it still does say that tryptophan is still economical even at $13.50 a pound I've got plugged in this calculation. Okay? And if you look at this another way, is for each incremental step with DDGs, how much value is their potential? The value does go down slightly. And I do put up here potential savings because this doesn't calculate in the loss in yield that we get when we feed DDGs all the way to market. But the potential savings here is, again, up to $8.30 a pig at feeding 40%, or if you feed at 20% of the diets, still $4.50 sitting out there as compared to buying corn and soybean meal. Okay? Well, one thing that Kyle Coble has taught us and some of his research is that if we feed these high fiber diets, and this is an example with MIDS and DDGs, we talked about this last year at Swine Day, you reduce yield at market as compared to feeding a corn soy diet. And if we withdraw those diets for a period of time, here about 15 days, we can bring the yield almost all the way back. Somewhere around that 2 to 3 weeks, we get our yield hit back. We look at, not only do we get a yield hit, but we get a little lower performance when we add DDGs. The calculator I showed you has the lower performance built in, but doesn't have some of that yield hit built into it. And so you look at if taking those pigs off of that high fiber diets, putting them on a corn soy diet for a short period of time, brings back that carcass weight considerably, getting you closer to the control corn soy fed in this example. And so when we run the economics in this scenario, this economics will toggle back and forth from time to time in terms of corn soy being more valuable versus high fiber diets. But the one thing that's very interesting to me is every time I've ran this scenario, running a withdrawal period will always make you more money than feeding those high fiber diets all the way to the end. Today's DDG's prices gives you as close as it's ever been. And Wayne Cass has worked with us on a very nice small calculator to go through what's the economics of just when you're looking only at DDGs and not MIDS like this. It tells us the same thing, but right now it's not a huge economic difference because the DDGs are so valuable in terms of so low cost compared to the corn. But pulling it for a short period of time I've not run an economic scenario yet that's a wrong thing to do. The last thing I'm going to talk about then is tryptophan. And tryptophan to lysine ratio we've talked about a little bit over the last few years, and this is one that a lot of our diets fall down to formulating on tryptophan to lysine ratio, and now with tryptophan available, it's just how much to put in the diet. And it's a very expensive amino acid, obviously, and it makes a big difference on where we set this ratio. And I want to give Kevin Touchette and Jinomoto a lot of credit for helping us with funding these research trials. This is 4 different finishing trials that Marcio Gonçalves conducted over the last year and did them for these different weight ranges. And the way these trials were set up is we did them over short periods of time to make sure we weren't over the lysine requirement. Whenever you're looking at a second or third or fourth limiting amino acid, you got to make sure that you're not over on those other, too over on your first limiting amino acid to excess on lysine if you want to look at the ratio of another amino acid to it. And so we made sure that at the end of the phase we were still below the pig's requirement in these trials. So that was a big piece of getting these responses. And you can see that within individual trials there is some bouncing on exactly where that maximum is. I mean, you can see that the maximum always fell out here at a pretty high tryptophan to lysine ratio compared to what we normally would have fed. And when you go through the statistical analysis of this, and you end up being a much more easy to understand curve, when you put all these different data sets together, you can predict how much growth performance you would expect to get at any level of tryptophan to lysine that you want to feed. Obviously, you get down here in these 14.5%, 15%, you lose a lot of growth performance as compared to when you push things out to these much higher levels. For those of you that aren't familiar looking at this, most of the diets in the U.S. would be anywhere from 16.5 to about 18.5, 19% tryptophan to lysine ratio in the industry. And if you go through with this equation, you can calculate that if I formulate 4 different tryptophan to lysine ratios, just how much am I going to give up in average daily gain? The reality is that you aren't going to formulate to maximize average daily gain with tryptophan to lysine ratios at 21%. It's too expensive. When you look at Marcio's poster that he has out in the hallway, it'll tell you that we're going to be somewhere around that 17.5 to 18.5% most of the time is where the economic break point is. And closer to the 18, 18.5% is where we've been moving a lot of these diets to. Okay. In terms of feed efficiency is a little different picture. You don't get a whole lot of benefit once you get over these very low levels. Feed efficiency is a much flatter line. It's an intake response. Drives the pigs to eat more feed is why we get the response to tryptophan. In the nursery side, we see a very similar type of picture. You can look at the raw data on this and look at the fitted equations and see that the fitted equation matches up almost identical to what the grow finish one was. Where you see anywhere you start looking at this in the ocular statistics and say, well, 18 looks pretty good to me, but sure looks a lot better than when we go to these lower levels. And when you look at doing the economic analysis and the math on what you lose in growth performance, you don't lose quite as much as you did in the finisher because they're not growing quite as fast as they do in the finisher. But you still have the same kind of curve. And you can calculate then, based on the economics of your situation for each of these diets and what the value of the growth performance is, what trait ratio you should use for your situation. Now, Wayne would remind me that I've talked to him about this numerous times, that these trials were all done with deficient lysine levels. We need to come back and look at this when we formulate the diets a little closer to the pig's requirement. Do we really need to have the tryptophan to lysine ratio quite as high when we're exactly at their requirement as compared to being below? But I think what it continually has told us is we don't want to be very, very low on these ratios. Again, here's what happens with feed efficiency. No difference in feed efficiency once you get off of that lowest level. It's all an intake-driven response. And with that, I'll turn it over to Bob.
Good afternoon. Normally I say good morning because they put me on in the morning so that we don't run late for lunch. And so my incentive today, they put me on in the afternoon so I won't be late for the tailgate. So we'll keep things moving. But again, as always, I want to make a belated welcome to all of you to Swine Day. We really appreciate your support. We couldn't do what we do without your support. And we're very, very thankful for everything our allied industry partners do, our producers do, the students do. We're always very, very thankful for what you do, and so thank you very much. Mike covered DDGs. My job this afternoon is to cover amino acids, fat, and some additives that we want to keep in diets and some that we don't want to look at in diets. But to share with you a little bit on some of the amino acid research that we've been involved in, we've been comparing milo versus corn diets, and with in each grain source, low levels of amino acids, adding L-lysine and methionine, adding medium amounts of amino acids, lysine, methionine, and threonine, which would be very similar to what we're currently doing with your diets right now, adding lysine, methionine, and threonine. And in some cases, many of you are adding even greater amounts of lysine, methionine, threonine, and you're probably adding tryptophan to your diets. We analyzed the milo and corn before the start of this experiment, and it was a little bit different in that it was much lower in valine than it was in tryptophan. And so the fourth limiting amino acid was actually valine rather than tryptophan, and normally it would be the other way around. But that's what the amino acid analysis told us. And in the growing phase, late nursery from 25 to 50-pound pigs, we saw no differences between the pigs fed milo and corn, which for some of you raising your own milo is good news, and no differences in feed efficiency. So again, this is some of Kyle Jordan's research that he's been working on. When we look at the amino acid addition, again, lysine and methionine, lysine, methionine, and threonine, and lysine, methionine, threonine, and valine, we saw no differences in average daily gain, which is great information telling us that the low-protein amino acid fortified diets that we've been formulating for you are sufficient. We're having good luck with them, and we see no differences in feed efficiency. So Kyle's done a great job in looking at that in late nursery diets. He's also gone ahead and we've looked at the same concepts, the same principles in late finisher diets or in finisher diets. Here we saw more the typical milo versus corn response, slightly lower average daily gain with milo and slightly poorer feed efficiency. Again, our standpoint or our standard argument that milo's worth about 96% the feeding value of that is corn. And so in the finishing phase, we saw a little bit greater differences, and we also saw some differences in average daily gain with the amino acid supplementation. And what I want to point out is that feed efficient, our average daily gain was kind of level and then dropped off at the high level of amino acid supplementation, but we didn't see any effect on feed efficiency. And thinking about this, I think it ties back to what Mike just talked about on tryptophan requirements, that the tryptophan requirement for optimum feed efficiency is going to be a lot lower than it is for maximum average daily gain. And so maybe what we're seeing are some issues. We were marginal in tryptophan in our diets that influenced average daily gain, but we weren't so marginal that it influenced feed efficiency, or in this case, it didn't influence feed efficiency. So again, this gives me a lot of confidence in our regards to our formulations. Many of your diets that we're working with and others in the room that are helping you with are generally formulated to that, as Mike said, 18 to 18.5% tryptophan to lysine ratio. Again, looking at carcass traits, again, the standard about 1.5 difference in iodine value versus milo in the corn soy diets. So again, if you're going to Triumph and looking at opportunities to lower your iodine values, certainly milo has some options there. We just need the price of it to come down relative to corn to price in some diets. A lot of milo is being shipped overseas, and it's resulted in increases in its price. Touch upon, again, more of the amino acids. We look at current corn and soy prices. The amino acid prices that have lysines increased, methionine's almost tripled, threonine has about doubled. There's still opportunity to save money with the low-protein amino acid fortified diets, adding lysine, methionine, threonine, and in some cases tryptophan. So there's certainly opportunity. It's the issue of the availability that's the hard point. And that's kind of the good news, bad news story, that we can use those amino acids and replace some of the soybean meal in diets. The challenge is their availability. And the reason why lysine, there's a relative increase in demand for the hydrochloric acid that goes into manufacturing lysine that is being sucked up by the oil industry. Methionine, shortage of the precursors in its manufacturing process has limited its production. Threonine, because of the economic situation in China. A lot of the threonine that we use in our diets is manufactured in China. They've had some rougher economic times or have not seen some of the profit opportunity that they have, and so they've cut back on production, making that short. So the options that we have today, if you don't have very much methionine and threonine on inventory, or are really looking at some very high prices, going back to corn, soybean meal-based diets with 3 pounds of L-lysine, what we've done in the past. The DDG-based diets do not need much methionine or threonine, so that provides an opportunity to save some money there. And then again, what we've been telling people is that if you do have methionine and threonine on inventory, maybe that's something worth saving on the baby pig nursery diets and going with the corn, soy, lysine-based diets in finishing. But I want to point out, don't go home and take out all the methionine and threonine because and leave lysine high, because as Manuel's data from 14 years ago now, shows that when we add 3 pounds of lysine, everything's great, but when we get to 4, 5, and 6 pounds of lysine, if we're not adding the other crystalline amino acids to make up their requirements, we run into problems. So don't go home and just take out the methionine and threonine. We need to reformulate, and give us a call. We're happy to work with you on your formulations to make sure that we're in good shape. I want to talk a little bit now about added fat, and fat prices come down, corn prices come down. People have been calling, asking about the opportunities to add fat. And if you're purchasing fat for 33 or 34 cents per pound in grow finish, that's going to cost you about 66 cents, taking into account improvements in feed efficiency and slight improvements in average daily gain. If you can purchase fat for about 30 cents per pound, it's a break even, and in some places where people are fortunate enough that can purchase fat for that 27 cent range, there we're looking at about a 60 cent benefit. So again, it all depends on where you are, what fat sources you're using, where you're located, what opportunities you have from feed manufacturing to come in with opportunity with fat. And as I mentioned before, please stop us, send us an email, give us a call, stop by. We're always happy to work with you on your diet formulations. So, again, some other data that Kyle has been working on for his master's degree, looking at adding increasing soybean oil, corn oil sources from ethanol production, corn oil source 1, corn oil source 2, evaluating if the byproducts from ethanol production, the oil that they are producing that don't go into biodiesel production, that if they're good options from a nutritional standpoint. We saw a nice response to increasing soybean meal or soybean oil. We saw a nice response to increasing corn oil source 1, but corn oil source 2, although it gave us a little bit of a bump in average daily gain, we didn't see quite the linear improvement in performance as we did with the other fat sources. And so what this tells us is that not all corn oil is the same, and that we need to study more to understand what some of the differences are between the different oil sources and why they might be responsible for some of the differences in performance that we see. But regardless of the fat source, we saw nice improvements in feed efficiency, going from about 1.6 down to 1.45, 1.4, 1.44. So again, the fat sources are really helping us out on feed efficiency, looking at some options there that again, based on price, may offer you some opportunity to save some money. Another study looked at soybean oil and a further refined corn oil source. In this particular study, we didn't see any differences in average daily gain, but again, we saw the nice improvements in feed efficiency. So again, very typical. We see nice responses in feed efficiency. Usually, most of the time, we see nice improvements in average daily gain. It's just a question of the economics and how that works for you in your particular situation. Kyle put together some of the economics in just the nursery phase and combining those studies, looking at the effects of added oil on income over feed costs, and there was about a 30 to 40% advantage in the nursery phase to going to 2.5 to 5% oil. Again, give us a call. We're more than happy to work with you on your formulations and where things might turn out. Other things that we've looked at. In the past, we've looked at copper sulfate, we've looked at zinc oxide, some other products, essential oils, and the feed-grade medications are always questions on what we should be doing in baby pig diets with these products. Julie Feldposh, on her master's research, has looked at control pigs, pigs fed added copper, where we see a nice response to added zinc, and a response to therapeutic levels of CTC. So again, the old standards are still effective, still what we want to be looking at in terms of zinc oxide in starter diets at 3,000 parts per million to start out with, and then lowering that down to 2,000 parts per million as the pigs get a little bit heavier. Looking at different sources, or again, added zinc, no added zinc, or added zinc, we see a nice response to added zinc, an average of about 0.88 average daily gain versus about 0.82 average daily gain. So a nice response to zinc, and within each zinc source, again, seeing the therapeutic response to CTC in this particular case. So again, the old standbys are just as effective. Other studies, people are looking at other sources of zinc. This happens to be an encapsulated zinc source. Again, the theory behind that it would make it more digestible, more available to the pig, and perhaps we could get by with a lower level of encapsulated zinc than we do with zinc oxide. And as we showed, we saw similar performance with the same levels of zinc versus encapsulated zinc. The reason why we didn't have the 3,000 parts per million is that we thought we'd see the same performance with the lower levels, but in this particular case, we didn't see that. So again, we're seeing nice responses to zinc oxide. Other zinc sources we need to evaluate on an economic standpoint. Okay? One thing I'll alert you to, and Hyatt Frobos has done a fantastic job with his master's and onto his PhD research, working with the undergraduate students, looking at vomitoxin potential issues. And we're just starting to hear rumor of vomitoxin issues and DDGs, and so we need to be careful to point out the changes in feed intake or average daily gain as a response to feed intake if we run into vomitoxin issues. And so we need to be monitoring DDGs. I think that's what we've got on this particular slide, that we've got some initial reports coming in with around 3 parts per million vomitoxin in DDGs. We need to monitor the situation. If you do have contaminated grain or DDGs, dilution is the solution. Again, trying to blend in normal grain or use small amounts of DDGs in the diets. Hyatt's research has shown that sodium metabisulfite is an excellent opportunity to help mitigate the effects of vomitoxin. The product diffusion is another good product used for short periods of time. Just need to be careful in that these products tie up the vitamin thiamine. We don't worry about thiamine very much in swine diets. We don't routinely add it in supplements, but there is some interaction between the two, and if you feed these products for very, very long times, we can run into some issues there. But again, the take-home messages, amino acids are certainly going to be cost-effective, but probably until first quarter 2015, they're going to be in relative short supply, so we need to formulate our diets accordingly. Depending upon where you are and your price opportunities, that fat may offer some opportunity to save money. And then again, look at the additives for baby pig diets and what works and what's economically justified for your particular program. So that wraps me up. Again, thank you guys all very much, and I'm going to turn things over to Joel.
All right. Well, again, welcome, and I get the luxury of batting cleanup of this group. I know we've been sitting over an hour now, and I'll try and keep things going. And we have what I'm going to try and do is next talk about a group of Bob was talking about some potential things to be looking at, and back to the everyday technology side and feed additives that we need to really be thinking about in terms of that hold that a potential opportunity right now. I'm going to just briefly talk about schisis, tribasic copper chloride, and traditional ractopamine. Schisis is a new product that's relatively new in terms of what's been approved in terms of an antibiotic use. And the way to think about this for you producers in the room, many of you that have cattle have long used ionophore, Bovatec, or Rumensin. Okay? Way to think about this is it's now approved in swine. It's an ionophore, goes under this type of name. And again, this falls under a classification of antibiotics that don't get into the category of some of what's maybe common with some of the federal regulations and voluntary withdrawals on growth promotion status. Again, there's along with some of the company data, there's been a number of commercial studies done. We've been involved with some, been able to get nice responses. Again, data in terms of we've been able to find some growth promotion effects from that. There is some things about it that you have to be very careful of. It cannot be used in combination with other antibiotics, especially that of Denagard. There's some toxicity effects. Again, working with your veterinarian to make some of these decisions in terms of the antibiotics become very important. But just want you to be aware in case, as a producer, you haven't been aware of this type of additive that's now available. Tribasic copper chloride. Again, copper has long been used in our swine diets. This is, again, back to maybe something that has been around for decades. We've used copper sulfate. So when you producers get your diets and you find the little blue particles in, I can remember in South Dakota where I grew up on our swine farm, there'd be the blue little specks in our feed and wondered what in the world that stuff is. Well, that was the copper sulfate. Very traditional, and it's used in many of our current diets today. Tribasic copper chloride is another copper source we've been involved with over the last few years. And again, for 3 different studies here at K-State, and then a study that was done at JBS, if we do a summary of finishing work, looking at from the beginning of finishing fed all the way to slaughter, if we look at an improvement compared to the control in hot carcass weight, we generally have seen a 3.5, in one case almost up to 8 pounds of additional carcass weight when fed throughout the entire period. Traditionally with copper sulfate, we would feed it during the beginning period, the nursery up to the middle finishing, and not much of an effect after that. what we have seen with this particular copper source is a continued improvement. And again, this has been evaluated, and again, as a producer, work with your nutritionist to come up with potential alternatives. As we move away, again, from more antibiotic type of products in our diets, we need to look at some of these others that are available to maintain or improve our growth rate throughout. The other one we just want to bring up is back to ractopamine. Traditionally, and again, this isn't a new technology by any means, but we want to point out a couple new things that have come on the last couple years. Traditionally, Pelleting, when it had been out for a large period of time, was at a 9-gram level. So it was 1 pound, would give you 9 grams in the total diet. Well, its label and concentration has changed to 2.25, where it takes 4 pounds to get to the 9-gram level. And there was many mills that have worked through that over this last year. And so as a producer, if you're doing on-farm mixing, we need to make sure that that you know what you have in terms of product concentration and inclusion level. As we fall in then, an additional product that's become available, that's a ractopamine as well. This product is a 9-gram level. So it takes 1 pound to get to the full 9-gram inclusion. So again, the point of this is, and as we run economics, ractopamine continues to still be economical. It has been, will continue to be, as all indications show, even with lower corn prices. Just make sure you're using which product and then the correct inclusion rate so you're not getting yourself in trouble in terms of feeding excess or not feeding enough in terms of the product you have in the mill. Okay. Want to come back now to some feed processing work that's been done over this last year. This study, John DeYoung has worked with us both on his master's and now finishing up on his PhD this next year. And this is a study funded by the National Pork Board. We approached them, and basically what's interesting when we go back to particle size, certainly there's been work done over the years. I mean, it's why we grind our grain, is to get the benefit from it. Surprisingly, within wheat, and many of you in this room have fed wheat in terms of as we get it economical, different parts of the country. Malachi visiting us back from Canada, formerly part of our group. We feed wheat all over the world as well as in Kansas at different times of the year, when it comes in. And what is surprising has been that there's been very little work done in terms of quantifying, does grinding wheat correspond with the same response as grinding corn? And that's a question ultimately we wanted to get to. And one of the things as we grind wheat finer in particular, it flours a lot more. We get much more finer particles. And as we found in the nursery, when you give pigs a choice of a fine ground wheat product versus one that's normal at about 500-600 microns, those nursery pigs, if given a choice, will absolutely go eat that larger particle size wheat compared to the floured up corn or wheat, and that makes sense, all right? They just had a decrease in feed intake. We want to transpose that into finishing. One of the things, as we get finer ground, and everybody knows, if you get a load of feed that's been really finely ground and it sets up into the bin, Craig, all right, you know, when we take it through and grind, we know the flowability goes down. And here's just a good indication of an angle of repose. Basically what this means is as the steeper the angle, the higher the number, means the feed flows more poorly. It's going to set up in the bin, can set up in your feeder, wherever, and just doesn't flow. And obviously we want a fine grind, but we need it to obviously flow through the system. And so in this study we had a wide variety, and we certainly can run into issues as we get to a finer ground particle size of any cereal grain. So as we get into the day of the first study, and this is in meal diets, so these first studies I want to show were actually fed in meal during the finishing period from about 100 to 265. You'll see as we ground the wheat finer, we didn't have any influence on average daily gain. And this isn't uncommon in a lot of situations, whether it's corn. Sometimes we'll see a slight advantage in average daily gain. Most times, relatively holds flat. The one thing that we did see, and I think this is what really becomes important as we continue to grind wheat finer, look what happened to feed intake. We dropped from about 5 3/4 pounds, just over 5 1/2, significantly decrease the feed intake of those pigs. And again, as we went further, we didn't change it anymore. The one thing then is we didn't change average daily gain. We had an effect on feed intake. Our feed efficiency improved as we ground particle size finer for the wheat. This would be very typical what we find in corn and other cereal grains. So the typical response that we found in feed efficiency, again, in meal diets. Okay? If we look at digestibility, the finer we grind. So we're basically pre-chewing it. I mean, that's the whole concept of why we grind. It's why we don't feed pigs whole wheat and whole corn. We don't do a very good job of digesting it through those animals. And so by the finer that we grind it, the more opportunity we have for the digestive enzymes to wrap around, break it down, and use it. And that's exactly what's shown. Based on our feed efficiency, we get improvements in digestibility. Now, we're going to do the same type of experiment, but we're going to actually pellet the diets this time. Okay? And the reason we did this study is, and some of the work John did as well with corn, is that we would get the typical responses to grinding corn finer in a meal diet on feed efficiency that we just saw in the wheat. But when we would take those same diets and pellet them, we would no longer get the additive effect of, generally get about a 5% improvement from the pelleting as well as an improvement from the grinding of the corn finer. We would not get that added benefit, or we would not get a benefit from grinding corn any finer than about 600 microns when we pelleted the diet. So we wanted to do this study in wheat to see if in fact that held true. And again, for average daily gain, again, these are all pelleted, about 2 pounds a day, no change, just like in the wheat diet. Here we are in feed efficiency. As we ground the diets finer, the wheat finer, we did not change feed efficiency. And that goes against, again, all the logic. As we grind finer, we should improve feed efficiency. But now we found this in wheat, we found it in corn. When we grind much below 600, there was not an additive effect. Okay? We recognize many producers grind their corn, integrators especially, grind corn really fine. They're going to pellet it and kind of make a kind of a poor quality pellet in general, but it flows. They are pelleting for simply to grind the corn finer. And so I think here we need to look at why aren't we picking up, as we make a good quality pellet, both in corn and wheat here, we don't get that added benefit. And there's some thoughts as we pellet, we may have particle size reduction through the grinding and the pelleting process. But again, I think something for us we kind of taken a step back to realize that they're not necessarily additive. And unfortunately, that's not a good thing. We would want to get that feed efficiency benefit as we pellet. And so as we think about diets and make decisions, are we going to pellet or not, basically it's grinding corn as fine as we can, or wheat, and just getting it to flow. If we need to then pellet, we may not get the further benefit of a finely ground cereal grain. Okay? There's been a lot of discussion as producers have looking at reinvesting in mills and improving the grind quality of their cereal grain. Here's an example of a producer that transitioned their roller mill this past year. From 2013, they had a 2-high roller mill. Average particle size was about 600. 2014 changed to a 3-high, and basically here what we're talking about is 2 sets of rolls that the grain passes through, or 3 sets of rolls that the grain passes through while it gets ground as it passes from top to bottom. You'll see in this case the particle size was reduced by about 70 microns. That's a goal as more producers are looking at moving from a 2-high to a 3-high roller. Our goal is to get that particle size reduced. In this case, the producer was successful to pick up that 70 microns and then get the feed efficiency benefit from that by utilizing that in their feed mill. And again, I think we're going to continue to see more 3-high roller mills be continually put in place to get a roller mill to grind finer. Now, if we want to get that 200, 300 micron corn or wheat, we cannot do that through a roller mill very effectively. We utilize hammer mills for that, okay? So the 2 different ways that we grind grain, just an example on the roller mill side, how we can further improve particle size. Okay, pellet quality. If we're going to spend all the extra money of making a pellet to feed the pigs to get that 5% feed efficiency benefit, we need to make sure we're actually getting it. And what's pretty typically found is through our research, work that others have done, Ernie at Hubbard Feeds, others that have published, looking at the amount of fines at the feeder in terms of the feed efficiency benefit from pelleting. And in fact, if you have approximately 25% or more fines at the feeder, we generally see no benefit or very, very little benefit to pelleting. And so what we want to do is try and quantify how can we keep these pellets together. If we're going to spend the money and want to get the benefit from pelleting, we need to have a good quality pellet in the feeder. Otherwise, we just spent all that money. Unless we did it for flowability reasons, because we ground our corn really fine, we're not going to return any of that investment on pelleting. okay? And so that's what we want to do in terms of how in the process, from the time they're pelleted in the mill to the time they're at the feeder, where are those fines being generated, okay? John DeYoung this past, at the end of the summer, went up to DFS, a commercial mill in Iowa, and what our goal here is within a large commercial mill, where are the fines actually being generated out the back before they leave the back door, okay? So that's what the goal here is, and so what we did is I used we, yeah, really loosely. John and Jake had an undergrad go with, and they were great in the mill to work with, but if we took a sample of pellets after the pellet mill, there was about 9% fines at that point. Then they get sent through a leg down through the pellet cooler, and at the end of the pellet cooler, samples were taken, and really the same amount of fines. In this mill, fines weren't created between those 2 points. Then they went to a fat coater. At the end of the fat coater, they were taken again, and you can again see statistically, we had about a 6%, I'm sorry, I jumped ahead of myself here. All right, on the percentage fines, again, no difference on the cooler. We go to the fat coater. Again, we jump about 6% in terms of, just in the feed manufacturing process inside that mill from one place to the other, more fines are being created. And then we go to loadout. Look at here, we jumped in this case about 6%. So while we made a really good quality pellet here, within the mill we created about 10 more percent. Okay? And that's just part of the manufacturing process. I think we understand how mills are set up. The next steps with this is John's going to spend some time back in this mill. We're going to do some work on trucks in terms of the amount of fines that go into a truck versus how much come out, as well as work at getting fines at the tandem bends, and then sample at different points throughout the actual barn in terms of, is there a difference from the first feeder to the last feeder as that pelleted feed is augured down the feed line, and that's going to be done in this next year to try and quantify and bring together the whole picture of how we can keep good quality pellets together or where problems are in the system. One thing that happens too is pellets get broken up, it's kind of the fittest survive, okay? So if you have poor quality pellets but they're still a pellet, their opportunity to break is much higher, okay? And PDI is an index relative to how hard those pellets are, pellet durability index. And you'll see that we actually have an increase in PDI as the pellets go throughout the mill. And that makes sense because the weakest pellets broke up, they turned into the fines, and we have the strongest pellets left. So if you measure just PDI, actually PDI goes up, will go up the more fines that are created because we busted up all the poor quality pellets. So kind of an interesting concept as we look at different measurements of pellet quality, we need to make sure we understand how they're going in. Yeah, this thing's jumping ahead. Must say I'm talking too much. All right. So a second objective of John's study was, now we have all these good quality pellets, and we have all these fines that are generated at the different points. A question that we get, and Dr. Charles Stark, a part of our grain science, certainly one of the world's leading authorities on feed processing. We're so fortunate to have him back from North Carolina State and his industry experience to help us with these projects and be involved in getting these set up and with the everyday activities, is what is the difference? So we have this feed now, and we have all these fines, and we have good pellets. Nutrient-wise, are they the same or are they different? And there was a lot of debate. You know, you're creating fines from pellets, shouldn't it all be the same? All right? We went ahead and analyzed all these fines in pellets, okay? And you can see on a crude protein basis, there's about 13.5 in the fines, but over 15 in the pellets, okay? Different mills handle this different ways. They'll recirculate fines back in and get them pelleted. Some get sifted off. So depending how those fines get re-brought back in, we may be shorting pigs, or actually in this case, the good quality pellets have a higher level, again, depending how we mix those fines back in. So there is a significant difference in protein between fines and pellets. Fat the same way, but it's the other way. Actually, the fines in this case had a higher percent fat than the good quality pellets that were left. Again, creating nutrient segregation within the feed stream when we're pelleting diets in through. All right, we're going to change. I'm technically challenged. All right, does this work? All right. I'll have to talk behind my head. All right. So in this particular study, focused on, so we're going to switch gears now to a feeding study. And in this particular study, what the goal was is that many mills cannot pellet enough feed to satisfy the needs of all their customers all the time. So the question then is, which diets do I pellet? Should I pellet the more expensive early finishing diets? Should I pellet the later finishing diets that are cheaper, but where feed efficiency is worse? Okay, so basically if I can pellet them all or pellet them at different times. And what we wanted to do here, I'm not even touching the button, I swear. All right. On a feed efficiency basis, what you'll see is that the meal versus pellet, let's look at these two first. So this is a complete finishing phase, where we have our typical response, good quality pellets. Pigs were about 5% more feed efficient, as we would expect. In this second phase, you'll see in blue than green. In blue, they were fed meal the first half of finishing, pellets the second half. This diet, they were fed pellets the first half, meal the second half. What happened between those? Absolutely nothing. It did not matter in terms of do we pellet the first diet, the first half or second half, first or second, end up with identical feed efficiency, which was intermediate as you would expect compared to feeding it the whole time either way. Then on the rotated, these are two diets every 2 weeks. We change, back, use we loosely, back and forth. Started with pellets for 2 weeks, 2 weeks meal, 2 weeks pellets, back and forth. Again, when they're fed, when these four diets are identically fed, half the time pellets and meal, regardless of the way we did it, identical feed conversions. Okay? So again, an all intermediate compared to pellet and meal. Question again, when we feed pellets, we know one of the consequences is potential digestive problems in terms of ulcers, fallback, some of the health concerns that can come with feeding a feed that has been pelleted. And in this case, if we look at removals per pen, the meal diet had about 0.5 pigs per pen. There was, I believe, there's 27, 28 pigs per pen in these studies. But look at pellet. Significantly increased, and that is not untypical when we feed a pelleted diet. We'll have a higher percent removal. And again, when we fed half and half, regardless, it was significantly lower than that of the pellets. Okay. From an ulcer and keratization score, so the stomachs were collected out of a subset of these pigs, brought back here and scored. And again, what we can find on this scoring system is pellets were higher than that. There was a tendency overall between treatments, but numerically, the pellets in this case had a little bit higher, and again, a little bit of noise bouncing through, but those that were fed the meal or meal at the very end had the lowest combined score as we did that ratio. So again, we can recover some of those stomachs and problems at the end that have been fed pellets is one of the messages we would kind of glean from some of these numerical differences. Okay. Going to finish up here with a couple last things. One of the studies Jim talked about, we did a commercial study at Hordes in Ohio. They have capabilities in gestation to do group feeding, where we can feed up to 4 particular diets. And really the goal here was to look at in late gestation, can we influence sows by feeding more or less lysine or more or less energy to influence reproductive performance and piglet birth weight. And this was done from day 90 to farrowing. So in this case, again, when we talk about 10 grams of lysine or 20 grams of lysine on a low energy, which is about 4 pounds a day, the high energy is about 6 pounds a day for a relative reference in terms of how much feed was fed. You can see that there was a significant lysine effect. We feed more lysine, the sows had more weight gain in that late period. Also, when we fed more energy, as you'd expect, to give the sows more feed, they're going to gain more. Born alive, absolutely nothing as we looked across the different treatments in terms of, and as we would expect, this is a late gestation feeding. We probably wouldn't expect to change that much, but we're going to continue to glean out some of the information in terms of stillborns, other things to still kind of get out in terms of relative changes. But back to birth weight. There's been a lot of work done with bump feeding, and we've done other studies. There's studies that show effects. There's lots of studies that show no effects in gilts or sows. This particular study, regardless of lysine level, regardless of energy level, absolutely no effect on piglet birth weight. Again, back to add to some of the, in this particular system, obviously bump feeding was not an advantage. Okay. Going to completely switch gears and talk about our EPI system. Out at our SCW barns, it's 2 off-site nurseries, we had the opportunity to put in the electrostatic particle ionizing system. And Matt Baumgartner's here. They have a booth out here. You've seen a lot of different information on this. It's been done in commercial studies as well. And what we want to do is bring that technology into a research setting to see, in fact, what happens in our particular situation when we have 2 identical nurseries that we could do some official testing in. And basically, the way this technology works, it ionizes the air, basically helps pull the dust out of the air, okay, is a way to think about it. If we look at and do measurements of dust inside the barn, you're going to see that we have a micron. Remember, on the feed, we went from 600 to 200 microns, okay? These are still microns, but from 0.3, very fine dust, to 10. So again, this is dust particles. You'll see in every case, regardless of size, the EPI, when we measured air dust in the barns, and we went almost, John, how many reps do we have in this? There's about 7 or 8 turns of the nursery where we had 1 barn on, 1 barn off, so 8 replications. In inside air dust, in every case, we're able to reduce the dust air in the barn. Then the dust was taken outside, out through the exhaust fans. We set up a system of basically a barrel tube. We're able to catch the dust coming, or air coming out, measure it. Again, in every case, there's less dust in the air in the barn. There's less dust coming out through the exhaust fan at each one of these as well. What we were most interested in is the gain effects. There's a lot of information reported in terms of potential benefit of gain. And through these particular studies at P0.09, so a tendency, there was a tendency for an improvement in average daily gain, even in our research complex out here with 5 pigs per pen. And so again, a technology that's being implemented, many producers have looked at it. Hopefully this helps to add to that body of literature in terms of producers making a decision. What's really interesting about this, though, is if you go into the barns, it pushes dust out of the air onto everything else. And so when the pans, anything metal, you'll just get build up a dust pretty thick and deep, but that's why it's pulling it out of the air. It's got to go somewhere, and then so it's pretty interesting once you go in the barns that have this on. Okay, the last thing I'm going to talk about is our new project that was undertaken this last year, a couple years ago. The pork producer KPA was approached to potentially help with some research funding, and what we were in need of at our swine farm out here was another nursery. Basically, our production capacity has exceeded, as we've seen, obviously with more pigs born on every sow. We decided we're exceeding our current capacity, and it was causing us basically to shift pigs around a little quicker than we wanted to out of the nursery. So we wanted to build a new nursery complex, not to change our numbers, but to expand teaching and research opportunities for the students. And our Kansas Pork Association was a major funder of research to help with this. Department of Animal Science was a financial contributor. Midwest Livestock Systems put up the barn. Barry Lures is here. Their group was tremendous in working with. Our campus planning folks helped tremendously in terms of all the daily logistics of a building going up on campus. Pat Murphy, I know you all know Pat. Pat was out there every day making sure that they were getting things done correctly, helped us make sure we had a quality product, and we all value, and many of you, as Pat's helped with a lot of buildings on your own farms. And certainly our farm crew, they were out there helping all the time with this building going up. So really what this building has, there's a lot of text up here. Basically 86 pens. It allows us to keep pigs in there until about 80 pounds. And so now we have an opportunity here to do research in pigs from that 40 to 80 pound range that we didn't have before, and many other places don't as well, because we often move those pigs when they're about 50 pounds. So we can utilize that space and that time to do some additional research on. So some quick pictures. All right, this will wake you back up if you've been sleeping. We have pictures for you to look at. So out at our swine farm, we had an existing nursery complex. Behind here is our gestation barn. And so we wanted to attach it right next, and I'll show you how we attached this new nursery, just so we could roll the pigs right over in carts when we wean, because the farrowing house would be to the left of this nursery. So now all these buildings will stay connected. So we dig the hole. We started pouring concrete. You'll see this is the center aisle. It's a plume system where the air, it will come in and pull underneath. And so this is hollow underneath here, and that's where our minimum ventilation will bring air in and back out. Here's Pat surveying to make sure that they're doing and getting everything done right. You can see the air plumes that were put in, okay? And so we have our center concrete walkway. And then on the next slide, here you can see this is where we're going to connect to our existing nursery building, and we're going to build a hallway across there so we could connect those buildings and keep all the pig movement from weaning inside, so we don't have to go outside with those pigs. We use tri-bar flooring, galvanized tri-bar flooring. We have that on a number of our other research and nursery facilities. Tremendously good flooring in our minds in terms of longevity. This building will be here probably in 60 years, quite honestly. We built it to make sure it's going to last, and you can see how we laid that right down so we don't have any pigs hitting feet walking in as we move them around. As we started to put the building up, the one thing we wanted to do, and I would encourage, after putting this in, if you do not have natural light in any of your buildings, many producers are doing that now. We did it in terms of, in our other barns at our farm, we don't have windows. So, we basically build them, and then we use the lighting inside. By putting this natural light in, even just small windows across, it absolutely changes the dynamics inside that barn, the brightness, just the working environment. Something I guess going forward, many producers are doing that. If you are building buildings, I would highly consider putting some outdoor light if it makes sense in your situation. So inside the barn, we have 86 pens. We have a feeding system that we can use when the pigs are off test and not on research, maybe towards the end, because again, we're hauling in the bags. Again, in a research environment, those where the feed's going to be bagged up and brought in. We had an open house right before that we were able to put pigs in. Pat, for those, Dr. Bob Hines, had many people out, and it was a really nice event, and Barry from Midwest was out. And again, the one thing we have too here is big viewing rooms. Right behind them is our feed room, and so as we do tours, have people out, whatnot, we have large viewing rooms from our feed room in, so we can use that as an observation room as well. And that way also, Mark, who's the manager of the swine farm, can come in and watch the people doing the work too, right? I'm getting the other head shake from the other people. So, yeah. So that, again, we're very fortunate of the support of the industry and the Kansas Pork Association for being able to build facilities out at our swine farm. We're in the process of putting next steps together in terms of a longer plan vision of other facility improvements that we're needing. And with